Edwina Murphy-Droomer is my name, and I want to warmly welcome you to this interview in the series that is all about unleashing the audacious woman within. Today, we have with us Lizona Eriks, who is a qualified mediator who is deeply passionate about people having the ability to resolve conflict with all that is going on across this precious planet of ours, within our homes, within our communities, and of course globally. Conflict resolution is just such an important subject. So for those of us that never got taught it, I believe that this is a hugely powerful and important conversation. Lizona, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Edwina. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're the lucky ones. So for those that haven't had the pleasure of meeting you until now, would you tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to be doing the work that you do now?
Well, I'll try to keep it brief because it's quite a bit of a story actually. But as you know by my accent and the name, we've been practicing doing my name because it's hard. Yes. Is that I'm Dutch from origin. So I lived in the Netherlands. I studied law, and after my master in law, I travelled around Australia where I met my now husband. So fast forward, I did counselling education, and I've always loved working with people. And when I started working in the law space, I realized that I really enjoyed being with the clients, but I didn't quite like hanging over contracts and things like that. But also I realized that the system has lots of things that don't work. Like, I'm not against courts, I'm not against lawyers. I think it has a purpose. Mm-hmm. However, I firmly believe that anything can get resolved in communication. And so when I came to Australia, my degree was not recognized. I pretty much couldn't get a job. Like, this is the short version of it. No WA education, no WA experience, but I don't really take no for an answer. So I kept knocking on doors, and I did all the training that I had to do. Of course, my degrees were recognized, but I couldn't practice at the time. So I did all my mediation training, because for me, that was a really good mix between law and counseling, it's sort of in the middle kind of space. So, and again, then I ended up starting knocking on lots of doors and getting people excited about who I was. And I ended up getting a job as a mediator at the Department of Corrective Services. So that was in a criminal space between victim offenders. And from there on, I just been building it. So I had my own children. So I really wanted to work in family law to make a difference for children, because when parents are in conflict, it has a huge impact on kids. So then I did all the education I had to do for that. In the meantime, I worked as a PA. Not something I wanted to do, but actually something I learned a lot about Australian business. I worked for an amazing CEO, and also I have a lot of respect for people who do that job. It's a hard job. And then, but I did all the training in the meantime, and then I worked for a couple of non-for-profits. And in 2011, I realized that there was lots of things about that work and working for them that didn't work for me any longer. So I started my own practice, and that's now. Well, where are we? Like 9 years? We're in 2020.
Yeah.
9 years ago. So, and from there on, it really has evolved. So I still do a lot of mediation. So I help, as a mediator, I help people to resolve conflict. So that can be people who are in a relationship and don't want to split up. There's people who are after separation, and that's more for their children and their financial separation. I do it in workplaces and with corporates, commercial, things like that. And it has evolved into I started teaching at university, so law school, do corporate training, because everyone needs negotiation and conflict resolution skills. And then it evolved in consultancy. I have a podcast now. I have online courses. So it sort of is an evolving beast, I would say, but it's all in the realm of conflict resolution, negotiation, communication, and really building great relationships with people. And I really love it, and I'm super passionate about it, because I think conflict gets a really bad rap. People don't like dealing with it. They think it's really bad. Every time I'm with people, train people, I ask, what do you hear when you hear the word conflict? And it's always like war and awful and fighting and all this. But conflict is actually so positive if you manage it well, because it creates innovation, it creates communication, it creates great relationships between people where they, get really robust. They're able to have robust conversations, lots of problem solving, etc., etc. I can go on and on, but it's actually really great. And that's what I love about it. People get a lot of peace of mind, a lot of freedom when they get really good at it. So yeah, that's the short version of my story.
It's an incredible life skill to have. It really is. And I'm thinking about a client that I had on a call just this morning who has been railroaded a little for a while by her boss in the work that she was doing. And when she showed up for the call, she was glowing because she had found her voice and spoken up. And I think he just didn't realize. He actually apologized, and now they've are moving forward much more positively. Finding the courage to find our voice in the words is a big step. But I think if we can, like, the workplace is definitely one area, but with everything that is going on across the globe at the moment, with lots of people still in lockdown, coming in and out of lockdown, there is lots of conflict happening in houses with family members that are spending far more time together than they possibly ever have before.
Yeah.
So what are some of the ways to start? What are some of the strategies that you teach people in learning to apologize, and learning to communicate more effectively?
I think the first thing is like you said, is to recognize that you have to renegotiate life. Like, life as it was is no longer existing. So I think what a lot of people do is they just keep going as they were. But the reality, so that is in families, that is with workplaces, like, the whole world is upside down, right? So I think the first thing is, as a family, and I can share as a family, what we did, like, things started to change. And we have dinner most nights together, but you can pick a point that works for you guys. Well, you're all home anyway, maybe have lunch together, because that's the other thing. Being home doesn't mean you are connected, right? Everyone's doing their own thing. Sit down and go, okay, how's everyone going? What are we going to do? So we renegotiated as a family, and then included our children. Our kids are 10 and one is 8 today. It's his birthday. Is to go, okay, so what do we need to work out? So for us, it was working out a routine that worked for everyone. Like, my husband had to work, I had to work, the kids had to homeschool, and to work out how are we going to do that. So you get really practical about it. So the boys understood this is when they could interrupt. This is when it was my responsibility. This was my husband's responsibility. These are the things, and that everyone needed. And also that and then in that space, you can also make requests of each other. Yeah. Like, I needed space away from everyone at least once a day. My 10-year-old as well. My husband has it less. And my youngest one would like to sit on top of us all day, every day if he could. Right. So I think it's that kind of conversation. That's a really good start. So, my 10-year-old would go for a bike ride on his own for a bit. I would go for a walk. And we make sure that everyone got space to do those things.
Yeah.
And then something new happened, and we renegotiated again. And sometimes that conversation was every day, because changes were happening all the time. And then when we came out of lockdown, because we're in West Australia, we negotiated again, and then sports started again, and we negotiated again, and now we're in a different routine. So I think my message is, don't keep going as you are. Sit down as a family and make agreements. If you don't have agreements in place, no one is clear about what the expectations are, and then there's a lot of unspoken expectations between people. People have it in their minds. They think the other person should know what they are thinking, or know, or whatever that might be. And then they get upset because they're like, well, you don't do this and you do that. And like you just said with your client this morning, she spoke up, and her boss was like, what? I didn't even know. I'm so sorry. Right? Yeah. So you have to make requests and say, I really need this from you guys, or can you do this for me? And then the other person can say yes or no, and you negotiate until you have an agreement. Yeah. Don't leave the conversation until you all are clear and have agreed upon what you're going to do. And then if something happens, you can go, hey, that was not the agreement, and it's really easily resolved. Or someone says, well, that's no longer working for me. Okay, you have another conversation.
Yeah. I just, in my mind, I'm thinking how powerful it would be to learn these skills as teenagers, or as, early. But, for the mothers in our audience, and there are lots of mums, there are those that aren't, but I think always in these situations, we can, if we don't have children, we can look at the conversation we would have had with ourselves when we were 17 and still grow from there. But, how do you go about starting to teach some of this? Obviously, conflict is quite heightened in our teenagers. They're often going through changes of friendships and all sorts of different things, particularly at the moment. Where do you start there?
Well, I think one of the things is modeling.
Yeah.
So I always say, every conversation you have in your household matters, even if it's a little one. Like on one of my podcast episodes, I gave an example of how I had a fight about a curry with my husband, very insignificant event, but it was around. But the thing is, it was really great because we worked through that conflict. And it was a minor conflict, right? It was about putting potatoes in a curry or not. But you get the gist. It's not something major, but your kids are watching you do that. So I think one of the things is to actually be really good at yourself, or when you are stuffing up, because that happens.
Yeah.
You know how to say sorry and take ownership for that.
Yeah.
So also in your communication with your teenager, because if you are sometimes, I mean, I don't know about you, but parenting is a lot of it is winging it a little bit, right? So if I make a mistake, or my kids, because I trained them in these, well, trained them sounds awful, but it's like we have this conversation as a family and agreement. So my kids pull me up when I break an agreement, and they're like, Mom, you promised this or that. First of all, they know they can. I won't get angry. I'll go, oh, I didn't I? Sorry. And I clean up my mess with my children. So if you want your kids to behave like that, you're going to have to do it. So you can't expect the kids to get this from somewhere. So that will be my first thing. So when there is something that's happened and you didn't do very well, go and apologize to your teenager. They know how to do that. And then you can tell them what a good apology, for example, looks like. So what I always say about apologies is you have to really own what you did, right? So you can say, this is what I did, without ifs and without buts. So people apologize terribly. They go, I'm really sorry, but it was just because you did. It was just because, so you're actually blaming the other person for your behavior. So it really doesn't work. So really own it and then say, listen, that's sorry. And then make a promise. So you can say, I'm sorry that I'm gossip behind your back and I shouldn't have done that. I'm really sorry I hurt your feelings. I think this might be impact on you. And I promise to never do that again. And then you need to keep your word, because if every time you do it again and you say sorry and you do it again and you say sorry and you do it again and you say sorry, people are going to go, that really makes a difference to me. Okay. So so it's really important that you do that. And it's really important that you teach your kids that. And then when your children see that and learn that, and then you can, when they apologize to you and they don't do very well, you can say, hey, you remember how I did that last time? Make sure you own it, because this doesn't land very well for me. It actually feels really yuck if you do that. So you just have those conversations. I think that makes a really big difference when you model, when you talk to them about it. My kids, for example, my son came home the other day and he was complaining about stuff at school. It doesn't even matter what it's about, but he's like this. And I said to him, who did you speak to about with that? Who did you go and talk to? And he goes, no one. I said, what do you want me to do about that? I said, if you're not going to talk to your teacher, I said, if you need help at one point, I'll be there to back you up, but you need to make a request. And then he did. And then he made a difference. So when kids also get the experience that when they speak up, when they request something, the people respond to that, then they will go and start doing it. It becomes a habit. But if they never go and do it, and they get the space at home to complain about it, and everyone jumps on board and it's like, oh, that's awful and awful for you. And I just go, well, go and have a conversation and let me know how you do. And if that teacher would have disrespected him or would have been awful, then I would have said, well, that's not okay. Let's have a conversation. But she's great, so she didn't. But then as your parent, you back them up later. So I think those kind of things really help. And the same with friends. I don't allow my children to gossip. They said, oh, this kid is this and that. And I said, well, did you tell him? No, I didn't. I said, well, don't go and talk to other people about that, because they can't help them. And you need to go and tell him. He doesn't know that you're annoyed about that. So again, it's just constantly bringing it back to their own responsibility. Talk to your friend that you're upset about what they did and why, and make a request. Because that's the other thing. People do not make requests. They just complain and they tell me, I don't want this. I don't want that. And I always, in my sessions, in mediation, in training and everything, I say, tell me what you do want. What that you do want, because I can't do anything with what you don't want. And then you can negotiate with someone and say, well, I want you to do this. And they go, yes or no, or whatever it might be. Does it make sense?
Taking that personal responsibility is huge. It's just such a life-changing understanding. You know, the minute we blame somebody else for being angry or for being, you know, whatever the emotion is, if we give, as soon as we pass that blame over, we're giving somebody else responsibility for our emotions. And so understanding that,
and you lose all your power, right?
yes,
so now you stuck because the other person has to fix it, and you got nowhere to go. So and you have to wait around until they're going to resolve it, until they're going to do something or whatever, and they might never want to resolve this issue. They might never want to resolve this conflict. So and I think that's the way to look at responsibility. I think often people see it as a burden, but I think it is really important for you know, people to see that it's a massive opportunity to take hold of your life and to have what you want, and go, okay, now I can make a difference to this situation.
Yeah. And I think, you know, one of the lessons that I've learned with my kids who are a bit older than yours, is just being okay with also just walking away and saying, actually, I just need to draw breath and think about this.
Oh, absolutely. That's, I think, and that's a really good point. I think the other thing is, well, for several reasons, that's a good point. I think one of them is, if I don't have the space to listen, because sometimes I just don't, I'm busy with something and I don't want people to talk to me. And I do the same with my husband. I start talking at him and he's like, what? And then, and I get annoyed and he's like, so ask permission, first of all, to speak to someone. But if the kids don't, I say, listen, I can't listen to you right now. I won't be able to respond. So you need to wait. So give me half an hour. I'll be back with you. And then I can have a conversation. Sometimes you don't know the answer. You can say, yeah, you have to think about it. But also when it gets really heated, I don't think we've got to that point quite yet because my kids are a bit younger. When you're in a heightened state of emotion, your brain actually doesn't operate very well. So you get the flight, fight, freeze responses. It's you know, your prefrontal cortex shuts down. So you can't really make decisions. You can't think. So it's really important that your brain calms down again. And sometimes the best thing is to do, let's stop this conversation for a moment. But the only thing what I would say, there's always a but, is make sure you finish the conversation later though. Because I think what a lot of people do, they walk away slamming doors and it's all awful and then it doesn't get resolved. It's more a matter of going, listen, this doesn't work right now and we're both angry, let's not. Let's talk about it tomorrow or in an hour or at dinner or whatever, and then have the conversation when everyone has calmed down. So not just brush it off and leave it, because then you get lots of unresolved conflict in your family and it just doesn't work.
Yeah. I would love you to put forward some strategies for people that are in the silence mode. I know that a coping mechanism for lots of people is they just start ignoring each other. When, you know, it's like, I guess it comes into that, you should know what's in my head and it's your turn to apologize, that kind of stubborn space that we can get into in relationships. So when silence mode is in place, what are some of the strategies that you put forward for supporting that?
Well, I think there's lots of reasons why people are silent. Sometimes also because people are tired, they have young kids, so they can't, or they feel it doesn't make a difference anymore. I think the only thing I really can say about that is that you just have to start talking. Like, you cannot, if you remind yourself and go, as soon as we stop talking, that's when real trouble starts. Like when I work with people who separate all the time, and this is one of the biggest things why people separate, is because they stop talking. So they've got no clue what's going on in their life. They become ships in the night in their own relationship, in their house, like it's completely separate lives. So I think you just have to be brave enough. I think that word again, encourage and responsibility, I think we keep coming back to that. It's like, okay, do you want this relationship? Do you want to make this work? If the answer is yes, well, then you're just going to have to start talking. And then you're just going to, and sometimes I think it's also okay to say, I feel really awful and I don't really know what to say. I just want to start talking again because this doesn't work. I don't think you need to know the full answers of everything. You don't need to get it right. And even if it doesn't go well the first time, well, then you apologize and you say, let's start this again. But I think if you also give the other person context of why you're doing it, that helps a lot. If you go into a conversation and you start all guns blazing about everything you're annoyed about, right? I've done this, I've tested it, trust me, it doesn't work. But if you go in and you say, listen, things have not been great and I'm so committed for us to work, but this is why I'm having this conversation. I want to make it work with you and I don't know necessarily how, but that's my commitment. So do you want to have that conversation with me? I bet you the other person's like, yeah, sure. Or they go, well, I don't want to make it work, but at least that's clear then, right?
I think
there's a bit of noise in my house here, sorry.
That's okay. That's all right. We're all doing things around homeschooling and all sorts of different things going on. I usually have my dog runs in and out and has a little party in the background just to keep everybody entertained. Really, I would love to just highlight that the power of I conversations rather than you conversations, and how effective that simple strategy can be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I think it comes back to what we talked about before. You can't change someone else. So you can make a request, but people can say no. You can't make them apologize. You can't make them do what you want to do. You have zero power over another person. People always say to me, I feel pressured to do something. I said, well, that is something that you are feeling, but it's in reality, the other person can't make you jump, can they? No. So I think when you have an eye, and also when you start with the blaming things, and I think that's what you're pointing to, people just get defensive.
Yeah.
And if you just say, well, this is how I feel, and I talk a lot about perception in my courses, but it's basically, I don't have a cup here right now, but often I use a cup with a handle.
Yep.
And if you look at one side of the cup or the other side, like one person sees a handle and the other doesn't, right? And then people start arguing about what they see. And we all have different perceptions. And there's, you know, I won't go into the theory of it, but the short version of it is that no one can perceive the same thing, like ever. It just doesn't happen. If you have a car accident and the police officer asks 5 people, you get 5 different stories. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that we relate to our perception as the truth. And that's where conflict comes from. So you go into a conversation and you did this and these are the facts and that's what happened and blah, 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 blah. Well, what do you think the other person is going to do? They're like, whoa, or they go, I'm out, this conversation is over. Or you get into an argument and it just doesn't go anywhere. Then everyone gets in flight, fright, freeze. It gets bigger, 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 and it just doesn't help, right? So if you have a conversation, but if you would come into a conversation like this and you say, listen, you know, this is my perception of the situation. I know that's not necessarily the truth. What do you experience in that? And then the other person gets to share what they experience. And then you can go, well, that's a bit different, wasn't it? Well, that's really not how I saw it. And then you have that conversations. And then again, you have your I statement. This was my experience and that was not great. And then you can apologize to each other, or you can create a strategy to not have that again, or whatever it might be. But it's around not recognizing that it's okay to see things differently. It's not invalid. You can also, and the example with the cup also shows that you both can be right. Or you both can be wrong. People have this notion that if I'm right, you must be wrong. Not really. One person saw a handle, the other one didn't. Same cup, just different side, right? So it's all those things. So I think if you go into conversations like that, unsure and curious, and go, I'm just wondering what happened to you. But you have to be in a certain state of mind for that yourself. So one of the other tips that I have is make sure when you want to go and have a difficult conversation, and sometimes you just know it's going to be a difficult conversation because it's a tricky topic. I always say to people, just make sure you are calm yourself. Don't go, when you're already heightened, just wait a little bit. Make sure the other person has the space and time to have that conversation and say, do you have time to have that with me right now? Even when you work from home, people are busy doing things. And then also beforehand, I think we often dive into these conversations without knowing what's the intention of this. What are we actually trying to achieve here? So have a bit of a think about, like, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Like, you're trying to achieve getting more space, you're trying to achieve having better communication. But again, some of them are all conceptual as well. So what are you actually asking for? And then you can go and ask for that, because if you're not clear, how on earth is the other person going to be clear?
I love that conversation around, you know, different realities. And my kids know, I say to them, you know, I can tell you that the sky is green and the grass is blue. If that's my reality, nobody can prove me wrong that that's what I'm seeing. You know, we have different realities. And I know I've been through a divorce. It was many years ago now, but in my mind, I was like, he is lying. He is making up stories that just are not true. But I've had enough girlfriends go through divorces now that I actually think that we just see things so differently. You know, it's not necessarily lying. It's just that we create our own realities. We create a truth that suits us often with many things. And so having those skills to actually have a conversation and find out what the other person's reality is, what they're seeing, that's big.
Well, and not invalidated either. I think that's the point you made as well. It is what it is. You can't sell it. People just get angry about it. That was not the case. Although, well, it was for me. And I think from a biological level, we can't actually see or hear everything. So I think as human beings, we can be a bit arrogant. Like a good example is a dog whistle. We can't actually hear that, right? So we have the notion that we can see everything, we can hear everything, we know everything. Or not everyone, but most of us, I guess, is that. And we can't. And people have, even when you get older, you know, at one point, the grass is really blue for you because your eyesight has changed. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it's, so it's part of the biological, how your makeup is and what information you actually receive. And then it's obviously all your values and what your worldview then makes meaning out of it.
Yes.
It's yeah, so you and I can never perceive the same thing. It just doesn't happen. But if you relate to it as a truth, and the other thing I think what you alluded to as well is then we have it through truth, and then we go and talk to other people about it. And the more and more people agree with us, the bigger it gets. And normally the other person becomes more the villain, and we become more the same because we're amazing, obviously. And over time, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I honestly have people sit in the same room, they talk about incidents that happen, and I'm like, were you at the same place at the same time? Because you actually get new neural pathways the more you repeat something. It's a bit like learning a language. And yeah, so I think that's a really good strategy. But you have to be interested in what the other person is thinking and not trying to be right and trying to get your point across. You're just going to have to let all that go. And you'll be really surprised about what other people tell you and what resolutions you can come to. It's amazing.
Yeah. And you know, it's the power of these conversations is it's just one thing can land and it's like, oh my gosh, I'd never thought of it that way. And, you know, my clients know that I talk in bumper stickers. There's a few things that I say, but I say them on repeat to try and really drive them home. And one of them is that we are meaning-making machines. At any time, we are pre-programmed or choosing to give a meaning to something. And it can be, I use the example of 9/11. There were people on this planet that thought that was the most catastrophic event imaginable. There were people on this planet that celebrated it. Who's to say right or wrong? We're meaning-making machines in any instance. And of course, with COVID at the moment, I mean, that's another thing that we can, you know, look at with this. So, yeah, I think that those understandings, the more we can have those understandings of how we're applying meaning to things is...
Well, and in conversation, meaning making happens all the time. So it actually happened in a session this week. One of my clients said something around, let me think what she said. It was a separation conversation. So she wanted to change, these people were divorced for a long time. She wanted to change the hours. But she, in her mind, she was doing the right thing. She just, their child was struggling for whatever reason. And she wanted less handovers, but she worked it out in her offer to him to have the same amount of hours. So she never said, she said, this is what I would like. And she explained to him what it looked like. And what he made it mean was, you're trying to take my child away from me. So she never said that. And she actually was really careful about having the same amount of hours. But I also understood why because it looks like a lot less time of less block. So I could understand where he came from. But I think in conversations, we hear things that are not being said. And then we make it mean something that someone says, and it's not actually what they mean. And that's where all the miscommunications start. So one of the things as well that I always say to people, don't make assumptions. So if you're not clear on what someone means, go and ask or why someone is behaving like that. And particularly in this current space, I work a lot with HR people and things as well. And I say to them, you're going to have a difficult conversation with someone. Go and check in first, please. What is this person actually dealing with? Go, are you okay? Have a human to human conversation, and then you can dive into the next bit, because otherwise, you know, you don't even know what you're dealing with, if that makes sense.
Yes, it's a heart to heart as opposed to a head to head.
Yeah, and people are also much easier to receive something, you know, and then you can give it context from your perspective and say, well, this is what we've been dealing with as a company, or when you're a parent, about this is what I've been dealing with in my house, whatever the example might be. And then they're much more willing to receive that information as well, because you were actually interested in what's going on for them.
Yeah. I love the word curiosity. It's like, just be curious. What's a different possibility? And I think about this in when we are dealing with people, particularly those closest to us. Your mum can raise an eyebrow and you've just got an immediate reaction to
The eye roll does it really well when I have
eye roll.
when I have separated people in my room that need to talk, and the eye roll, and that's all that's needed. Fair enough. Yeah.
But I know I've lost count so many conversations with my teenagers when they presumed I was thinking something because of the expression on my face. And it's like, I wasn't thinking about that at all. We all do it.
I do the same. I say to my son, "Are you like grumpy?" He goes, "That's just what my face is like."
Leave my face alone.
Yeah, I just got a grumpy face when I don't do anything. I was like, okay.
Yeah, it's perfect. I know that you have a couple of resources that the women listening to this could tune into to learn more from you. Could you take a minute to tell us what they are?
Yeah, so I have a podcast. It's called Conversations to Cut the Conflict, and particularly in the first, I would say, 6 to 7 episodes, they're very much about how, negotiating with your partner, how to have difficult conversations. So it's all around, because I recorded those in, when COVID started. So, but it also has negotiation interviews with like bigger personalities and things like that. But that's a really good resource to listen to. And there's also a free training that I have on don'truinyourrelationship.com that has communication tips for people in relationships. You can go there. I share a lot of content on content on Facebook and Instagram. So it's my name, Lisanne Eriks_life mediation. And if you go to my website, lifemediation.com.au, there is, I have an online conflict resolution fundamentals program. I saw, I guess, a gap in that no one is teaching people how to actually deal with conflict on a fundamental level. And we're all expected to be able to have these skills as a parent, as a an employee or a manager or a teacher or whatever you do in life. Like, conflict is something that pops up on a day-to-day basis, really. And negotiation is something you do all day, every day. A lot of people are just not very good at it. So I developed a program for that, and I will happily give the listeners to this a discount for that. It has videos, workbooks. It's really great, and I put my heart and soul into it. So those are a couple of things. Obviously, people can contact me directly if they want to work with me for coaching or need mediation. There's so many things to what I do, but I'm more than happy to provide my information if people are interested.
That's an awesome resource. I'll have links for everything below our interview so people can just click the link that's going to work best for them. Thank you so much for being with us today. It's just such an important conversation, and I feel like you've planted lots of seeds of possibilities of different ways of doing things and looking at things, and it's so powerful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Adrina, for having me. I really enjoyed it.
It's an absolute pleasure. As seems to be the case with so many of these conversations, the solutions seem surprisingly simple. Not easy, but surprisingly simple. It is just a matter of practicing one little thing at a time, taking one step at a time. So if conflict is something that is current in your house, whether it is or not, it's always going to come up at some point. And the more effectively, the more clearly, the more powerfully we can do that, resolve things, come to an understanding, the more incredibly beautiful our relationships are going to be, whether that is with a spouse, with our children, with people we work with friends, whoever it is a life skill. So I hope there is something within there that you feel like you can take away and put into action today. All right, that's it from me today. So much love, and bye for now.